Good evening. Thank you everybody for joining us for this virtual workshop, especially for Hazelton Associates. For those of you who don't know who we are Hapanowitz and Associates. We're an independent wealth management firm. We're based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but we work with Verizon employees all over the country, actually. We've been working with Verizon employees and helping them plan a successful retirement from Verizon for over 20 years now. And that's why we're doing these workshops. We're using that 20 years of experience and putting the most important information together in a concise and simplified way so that at the end of the day, you can maximize your benefits so that you can get the most out of them in retirement. At the end of the day, that's what's most important. And you guys know more than we do that these benefits can be very nuanced. There's a lot of moving parts to consider when even retiring from Verizon itself, that process itself. And so we want to make it as simplified and straightforward as possible for you. So what we're going to do today is cover two main retirement benefits, the pension and the 401k savings plan as well. And we have some questions that have already been submitted to us prior to this workshop starting, which is fantastic. But if you think of any additional questions throughout the presentation, you can submit them anytime. You can use the Q&A box that will be either at the top or bottom of your screen. And we'd love to hear from you guys. Before we get started, make sure to check out the Retirement Red Zone page. It's a page on our website, and it's dedicated to everything related to your retirement benefits. So the pension, the 401k, but also your healthcare benefits, life insurance. There's frequently asked questions, case studies, video content. Make sure to check it out. We think you guys will find it useful. It was honestly built around you, whether you're 5 years from retirement, 10 years from retirement, about to retire, or even if you're already retired. So pass it along to your friends who may already be retired from Verizon as well. That's Hapanowitz-associates.com/Verizon. Let's get started. Okay. All right. So let's start with the pension first. Now, Bobby, one of the most important factors when discussing the pension is retirement eligibility. So talk to us about what retirement eligibility is when it comes to the pension.
Right. It's really the first step in determining your retirement planning when you're able to retire. Your retirement eligibility and thus your pension eligibility are very important components to that. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the rule of 75. The rule of 75 refers to your age and the years of net credited service you have with Verizon. And those two need to equal 75 at minimum in order for you to be retirement and pension eligible. So starting with the age of 50, you have to be at least age 50 with 25 years of service or more, at least age 55 with 20 years of service or more, and so on and so forth in order to achieve that retirement eligibility with the 75 rule. The one stipulation being if you have 30 years of service or more, regardless of what age you are, you're retirement eligible at any time. It could be 48, 49, 50 years old. It doesn't matter. Now, one caveat to keep in mind, especially if you're before the age of 55, if you're younger than 55, is there is an age discount that applies to your pension of 0.5% per every month under the age of 55 you are. So for example, let's say you're 53 years old and 0 months, so you're 24 months away from age 55. That's a 12% penalty that would be applied to your pension, either annuity or lump sum. So again, with one stipulation, if you have 30 years of service or more, it doesn't matter how old you are or how far away you are from age 55. There are no age discounts that will apply to your pension.
So there's a strong incentive for Verizon employees to work for Verizon for a very long time.
Right. The more years in that credited service you have, all else being equal, the larger your benefit will be.
Okay, so let's move on now. You know, when we talk about the pension benefit, there's two main choices that an employee would have in terms of how that is paid out to them, either the annuity option or the lump sum option, which we'll get into in a little more detail. But let's start with the monthly annuity benefit. Casey, explain to us how this monthly benefit calculation works.
Sure.
What plays into that calculation?
Yeah, for the single life pension annuity calculation, it's based upon your pension band factor, which is in turn based upon your job title. You can actually find that number in your union booklet. You take that factor times your years of service, and that'll give you the monthly pension band amount.
So Would it ever be possible then for a monthly benefit calculation to decline over time?
Yeah, everything else being equal, if your pension band stays the same or increases with number of years or months of service increasing, your pension will go up, your monthly pension benefit.
But if someone were to change positions and then their pension band factor could change, that could potentially.
That could potentially affect.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's go back to what I mentioned before, those main options when it comes to that distribution of your pension benefit. Bobby, talk to us about those options.
Right. A couple of core options between the annuity payment or the lump sum payment. Let's start with the annuity. The main option is the single life annuity benefit, which guarantees a monthly income to your bank account from Verizon. And typically something that's chosen by somebody who is not married or doesn't have another beneficiary who may be relying on that income. If you are married or do have that other beneficiary that you have in mind, there's the joint and survivor annuity that you could choose as well. And this would be the standard option if you are married. Again, guaranteed monthly income for the retiree throughout the retirement, as well as a discounted benefit for their beneficiary at the end of the retiree's retirement when the survivor benefit takes hold. A few different options in there for 50% joint and survivor up through 75% joint and survivor. What we mean by 50% is, say, 50% of the retiree's annuity benefit would be paid to the beneficiary at the end of that retiree's life. And then, of course, after the annuity options, it's always the lump sum options as well. The lump sum is meant to be the present value of all of those annuity payments that you can expect to receive throughout the course of your life expectancy. So it's the present value of all of those payments. Casey's going to get into a little bit more detail, I think, on how to calculate that lump sum, but another option available to you.
Okay, so with the joint and survivor annuity, the benefit that's paid out on a monthly basis to that retired employee of Verizon is going to be less than the single life annuity amount. How would somebody go about choosing between that single life and joint and survivor options?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it depends on one of the biggest concerns. Are you married or are you not married? Or if you're not married, do you have other people who would be dependent on that income throughout their life as well? And if so, you would probably look at that joint and survivor annuity option very hard.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to that lump sum calculation. Casey, we talked about a few minutes ago what factors play into the monthly benefit calculation. Now let's talk about how that lump sum calculation works.
Sure. Well, the lump sum factor, it's based upon three main criteria: the monthly pension annuity, your life expectancy or your age, and also interest rates, primarily for the associates we're talking to, the gap rate and the PBGC rate. So in effect, Verizon is giving you a lump sum equivalent that would be paid, that could pay your monthly benefit over your life expectancy at current interest rates.
Okay.
As Bobby says, a present value factor. So if you have your calculator, you can plug it in and get the present value.
So I asked you this about the monthly benefit, and I'll ask you this about the lump sum benefit. Is it possible for that lump sum calculation to decline? I mean, for the most part, in our experience, we do see it grow over time for an employee. The longer they work for Verizon, is it possible that it can decline?
Yeah, if everything else were equal, if you had to maintain the same age and the interest rates, it would increase because of your more years of service, your benefit going up. But with life expectancy, as you get older, it does decline. It's a negative. It will decline based on that. If interest rates increase, it does decline based on that as well.
Okay.
So the three criteria, they're affecting the lump sum differently.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue into the a little more in-depth discussion about interest rates. It's one of the most important factors that we can, pay attention to when we're talking about that lump sum calculation. So, Bobby, explain to us what that relationship is like between interest rates and the pension lump sum calculations.
Right. Well, we like this image here because it is somewhat of a seesaw effect, an inverse relationship between interest rates and the effect they have on your pension lump sum. And this chart here actually shows what we're seeing today. We're seeing interest rates that are lower, resulting in higher lump sum values. And the reverse would be true as well. If we saw higher interest rates, that would result in a lower lump sum value. But again, circling back to what we're seeing here today, the PBGC rate is at a historical low, 0%. The GAT rate is at a relative low of 1.92%. Again, relatively low rates here, meaning that pension lump sums are higher right now relative to where they have been historically. And again, Christina, to highlight what you were saying about the importance of looking at pension rates, once you are fully retirement eligible, interest rates are one of the biggest determinants of what can move your pension lump sum value from quarter to quarter as an associate. So something to definitely look out for.
So, that's a great segue into the question that I want to ask you, which is how far out do you typically suggest an employee start to really closely pay attention to these interest rates in terms of it potentially resulting in them pushing up their retirement date, or maybe even, pushing it back by a month or two?
Right. So as part of your planning that you're doing for retirement, you likely have a projected retirement date in mind. Not necessarily a date that's set in stone, but an idea in your mind of when you want to retire, when you feel you'll be ready to retire. When you're within about 12 months of that date, we'll really start to look at pension rates hard. Again, the priority first and foremost is to make sure that you're financially ready to retire. Then it's to make sure that you're of the frame of mind that you're ready to make that transition into retirement. But once you have those two components in mind and you feel that you're ready, then we really start looking at those pension rates, because that can help you maximize your lump sum value if you push up your retirement, or in some cases delaying your retirement as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're having a couple of conversations with different people right now in terms of whether or not their retirement dates should be pushed up from early in the year to maybe right before the holidays. So, okay, thanks, Bobby. So let's talk about, Casey, rounding out here the pension conversation, those options that an employee would have when they're retired in terms of how they would receive that pension lump sum, if the lump sum is what they want to go with.
Right. They could take all or part of it as a taxable lump sum distribution. It would be taxable. So Fidelity, or actually Verizon, is required to withhold at least 20% for federal taxes. Or they could transfer a portion or all of it into an IRA account, keep it tax deferred. Or they could do a combination of the two.
Yeah. Whether you do a taxable distribution or a tax deferred, or to your point, a combination of the two, whatever that right decision is going to be different from one person to another. But we do suggest that you look really closely at that taxable distribution. That could potentially bump you up into a different tax bracket than maybe you're necessarily used to from your typical Verizon salary. So if that is the way you're leaning towards, we suggest working with your tax consultant or your CPA to make sure that you're prepared for any potential tax implications from that. Casey, is it allowed for Verizon employees to, if they wanted to do a tax deferred distribution, is it allowed for Verizon employees to roll their lump sum over into their Verizon 401k?
They possibly could. Right on the pension election authorization form, there is a box to check if you want to transfer it into a qualified plan, which would be a 401k, which could be the Fidelity Verizon 401k.
All right, thank you. Well, that's a great segue into the 401k conversation. So Bobby, let's talk about the 401k savings plan specifically for associates for this evening. Let's talk about what those investment options are. Give us a breakdown, an introduction to those investment options for the 401k.
Right, and there are several different types or varieties of investment options available to you in your 401k. Some have been there for quite some time, others are relatively new. The first one listed here are those asset allocation options that range from a very conservative allocation of 0% stocks and 100% bonds to a very aggressive growth allocation of 100% stocks and 0% bonds, with a couple of different options in between. The second option is those target date funds. And this is one of those newer options available to you as of earlier this year. And you'll see in your 401k that there's several different options of target date funds, a target date 2025 fund, 2030, 2035 fund. Well, what those dates are referring to is the target retirement date. And in the interim, you are glide pathing from a more aggressive allocation to a more conservative retirement type allocation. So how do you choose the right fund for you? Well, take your birth date, add 65 to it, and that will get you to your baseline target date fund to get started with. Then, of course, there are more asset class options, varying from stocks to bonds, different types of stocks, different types of bonds, different regions of the globe, et cetera, that help you customize your allocation specifically to what you want and need.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there's the Verizon stock. And something to note here, before, again, February 19th of this year, your employer matches were automatically contributed to Verizon stock. So it's actually not uncommon to see folks with 30%, 40%, 50% of their portfolio in Verizon stock. So what we recommend is that you look at your 401k allocations and make sure the amount of Verizon stock that you have in there is the right allocation for you, what you want that to be. Again, after February 19th of this year, that is no longer the case with your employer matching contributions. However, it is a good idea to check your allocations.
Yeah, Casey and I are working with an associate out of New York, and she unknowingly had hundreds of thousands of dollars just in Verizon stock. She has close to 40 years of service at Verizon. And, she just didn't know this because, to your point, it was automatically happening. So, if this is something that you are aware of and it is, an active part of your investment game plan, fantastic. But we do suggest that you review that allocation from time to time, because if it's not something you're aware of, that could potentially expose your account to a type of risk that we call concentration risk. So review those allocations. We typically suggest anywhere from 5 to 10%, right? In a concentrated
in any one given company, right? Anything more than that, we would consider a concentrated position. And to your point, Chris, we all hear the investment advice: set it and forget it with your 401k, right? And that typically is good advice. However, in this case, with the employer matches, it's possible that Verizon stock has accumulated. And with that in mind, we do think it's a good idea to check your allocations at least annually.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. So let's, Casey, talk about what those options are for an employee once they retire. What can they do with their 401k?
Quite a few options. One would be to leave the money in the 401k as is. Fidelity won't force you out unless you have a very small balance. They could send a kind letter to you and a check.
Ask you to leave.
Yeah, certainly. Or you could start immediate withdrawals. That's an option. Immediate or later on withdrawals. That makes sense if you're 55 or older. There's a rule where if you're 55 or older in the year you separate from service, there's no 10% penalty from the distribution from the 401k. So for folks under 59 and a half, they retired at age 55 or older, they could use that rule to take distributions out of the 401k. Or they could roll some or all of the money into an IRA account, keep it tax deferred, and take distributions out of the IRA account. So they can mix and match those, and they might keep some in the account, take immediate withdrawals. They could transfer the portion over into an IRA account.
Okay.
So it just depends on their financial plan.
Yeah. And again, whatever is going to work best for you individually, it's going to differ from one person to another. So definitely a lot of planning and a lot of conversation that goes into that decision. Absolutely. Thank you, Casey. So that rounds out our discussion and presentation for the pension and 401k savings plan. Now, let's do some questions here. Okay, so first question we have here, it was submitted prior to the workshop, several of these were. So the first one is, my 401k has done pretty well, but I want to protect some of that money. What are any ideas to protect some of that money in the gains? It's a great question. Bobby, do you want to take that?
So somebody who's done pretty well, that sounds like you've had a reasonable allocation to stocks in your 401k. And if you have, over this past decade, that's served to benefit you. Stocks have been outperformers over the past decade. Now, with that in mind, how do I lock in some of those gains? How do I protect myself against risk? One of the biggest determinants of risk levels in your 401k is asset allocation. How much stocks do I own in my portfolio versus bonds? What's the right amount for me? And that's a very nuanced question and an important one to ask yourself continuously as you get closer and closer to retirement. The right answer for you 10 years away from retirement probably looks a little bit different than it does 10 months away from retirement or in retirement, right? So that's an important question to review with your advisor. The other component too, aside from asset allocation, is being broadly diversified within those asset classes as well. So not just owning stocks, but what types of stocks do you own? Do you only own Verizon in your 401k? Or are you broadly diversified across large US stocks, small US stocks, international stocks to the extent it makes sense to? While you can't avoid market volatility when you're investing in stocks, diversification can help reduce your risk and it can provide the potential for outperformance as well. As a matter of fact, speaking to volatility, that's something that can be used to your advantage through the act of rebalancing in your portfolio, setting the right amount of stocks versus bonds in your portfolio. And then as you continue to make your contributions, you'll have the opportunity to reallocate and buy some stocks at a discount or continue to add to your bonds as it makes sense too.
Yeah, you really made a really important point a minute ago. As an investor, it's impossible to completely avoid any kind of volatility, even in the bond markets. It's impossible to avoid volatility, but we actually see volatility as a good thing, as a healthy thing. If you have an investment game plan that you've worked on and you're confident in, then you can use that volatility to your advantage, like you were saying. So that was a really great question. And these next questions we have, just like that first question, have a lot to do with personal finance and planning, which is fantastic. And, I'll just mention again, if you think of any other questions, please do submit them to the Q&A box, but we'll just keep going through these questions that were sent in to us. The next question I have is what are some pros and cons of 529s for college? And what do you do to manage them? So Casey, do you want to talk about 529s?
Yeah, 529s. Yeah, a very popular way to invest for college education or higher education to that matter. Very easy to start one up. The investment earnings in the 529 are tax deferred, and actually the distributions would be tax free if used for qualified education expenses. So very popular, easy to set up, easy to use, tax benefits. You name a beneficiary. If that beneficiary did not go to higher education, then you could name somebody else in the family as a beneficiary. Yeah, the negatives, if you need to take the money out, there would be a 10% penalty on earnings if you didn't use it for qualified education expenses. But most folks end up using it for education.
Yeah. And when we talk about qualified expenses, this question mentions college specifically, but now 529s can be used for high school, right?
Right, K through 12.
K through 12. So, that's something to keep in mind. Absolutely.
Yeah. Plus private schools or educational schools, vocational schools, training schools.
And in terms of, what we would do to manage that. So for 529, why don't you talk about that, Casey?
Yeah, most states have 529 plans. Pennsylvania has a very good one through Vanguard. So usually we have our clients go to the state's program and set it up, then we can monitor that program with them.
Right. So it's not something that we would manage daily, directly, but it's something that we would still have supervision over and make sure that we have that awareness of that piece of your overall financial puzzle. Next question we have here. How do I access my money if I'm younger than the 59 and a half minimum age? That's a great question. And Casey alluded to one of those, ways to do that a few minutes ago. But Bobby, why don't you, speak to that a little further?
Well, to take a step back, I'm sure, and we've discussed it here before too, but everybody's aware that if you take, in normal circumstances, if you take withdrawals from a retirement account before age 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty applied on top of any ordinary income taxes that you have to pay, with a couple of caveats. The first one is the age 55 rule, again, that Casey alluded to. If you retire from Verizon between ages 55 and 59 and a half, you can take one distribution per calendar year from your 401k, directly from your 401k, and you would avoid that 10% penalty. The other strategy that you can use is called a 72T payment or a SEP payment. You may have heard of a SEP payment, substantially equal periodic payments that you set up from an IRA account. And those payments have to last for the greater of 5 years or until you reach age 59 and a half. And so you set that monthly payment, typically it's a monthly payment, and you stick with that throughout that period, and you have to stick with it, right? It's somewhat rigid. And because it's rigid, because there are some nuances to that rule, we recommend that you consult your advisor if you're considering that strategy. But again, those are two strategies you can consider. Which one you use, the 55 rule, the 72T rule, or a combination of the two, is going to depend on your situation, how old you are when you're retiring from Verizon, what your preferences are for accessing your wealth. A lot of different considerations there that you can use. Yeah,
that's so true. If you're not sure, if you are retiring prior to 59 and a half, you're not sure how to go about accessing your wealth, there are some planning things that you can do, some illustrations that you can do to see what might be the best option for you. And you can do a combination of the two if you wanted, in terms of, leaving some money in the 401k, rolling the rest of it over to an IRA. So there's a lot of different things that can be done. And that game plan is going to look different from one person to another. That's a highly customized aspect of planning. Absolutely. Next question here. How does our healthcare work in retirement? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Casey, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, most folks listening to us have very good retiree health benefits, so you're very lucky. And at the same time, you're making your pension election at with the Verizon Benefits Center, you can make your healthcare elections. And normally we see the healthcare benefit, the medical benefits at least, stay about the same as you have them as a worker employee at about the same cost. You'll keep your dental care at no cost. You will lose your vision care, but there is a subsidy or a discount through vision, through Davis Vision. So again, very good retiree benefits. Now, when you turn 65, you'll go on Medicare. You'll go on the Advantage plan at no cost. You'll keep your vision, prescription. And in fact, Verizon will reimburse you the Part B premium in part. So it's just a great thing to be a retiree from Verizon.
From Verizon.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Casey. All right, next question we have here. How do I know if I'm taking out too much from my accounts in retirement? It's a good question. It's a loaded question.
It is a good question. It's a very important question too. And it doesn't start in retirement. It starts before retirement and the planning that you're doing. You want to make sure that the income that you're going to receive to pay for your basic living expenses for the other things that you want to do in retirement, you want to make sure that that's sustainable before you take that step, right? So it starts here right now in your retirement planning. But in retirement, we monitor that very closely with the people that we work with, and we're reviewing that with them periodically throughout retirement and to determine, okay, we're on track or we're ahead of track or whatever, that case may be. But you may have heard of certain withdrawal percentages or withdrawal rates. We look at it more as a range of possible options, and that's going to depend on many different factors that are going to be customized to you. How old are you when you're retiring from Verizon? What does your asset base look like? When are you electing Social Security? By the way, that decision is going to be factored into the other two considerations that we just discussed here too. So all of these things work together in order to get to the right retirement plan for you. And it's just important that you continue to monitor that with your advisor throughout retirement as well. Okay.
All right. So the last question that we have here, how do I know, another great question, how do I know if I'm ready to retire? Casey, want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's a question that's asked quite a bit and from our clients. And, Bobby alluded to it, having a plan in place will help you answer the question, will I be okay? Will my assets and income last at least as long as I do, if not longer? And then I think the other one is more mental. Am I ready to retire? So I think the combination of those gives you that confidence that it's time, both financially and mentally.
Absolutely. Yeah. These two last questions are such open-ended questions. They're some of the most important questions that can be asked, but really the way to find the answer, and you both alluded to this, the way to find the answer is through some in-depth planning. And, it is tedious. It's tedious work. It's a lot of fact finding. It's a lot of data gathering. It's a lot of, maybe on a Saturday morning with your cup of coffee, going over what your typical monthly expenses are. It's not the most fun thing to do maybe, but it's some of the most important things that you can do, because when you take that time to put together a plan, you're laying the foundation for a successful retirement. And so we can't recommend enough going through that planning process, whether it's on your own or with someone else. Most people have a plan in their head, and we can't, talk to how important it is to get that plan down on paper, because that way you can really see in a concrete way your intermittent and long-term goals and use those as benchmarks as you get closer and closer to retirement. And the sooner you do that, the better, in our opinion, at least. It's never too soon to start planning, even if it's 10 years out. With that being said, that is all the questions that we have this evening. Our number is on the screen. And if you have any questions, or if you want to discuss your specific benefits or your specific situation further, please do reach out to us. We're here as a resource for you. Make sure to check out the Red Zone, like I mentioned before. And we hope you guys have a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.